Right now, our real estate culture is pushing teams and people use it as maybe a competitive advantage, but not everybody has the background, whether it's through sports or something that, can create a framework for a healthy team culture. But I think the thing you have to focus on is everybody has untapped potential. But I think where we as leaders mess up is we think everybody's potential and everybody's quantum leap is going to show up in production.
You shouldn't start a team until you know why. Otherwise, you're just going to hire a bunch of really super expensive assistants. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Remington Ramsey. We found out not too long ago that we are top 5 podcasts globally, not just in real estate, but in all podcasts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you get anything out of this show, make sure you send it to one person that you thought of while you were listening. Today, my guest is Brad Knoll from the Fort Wayne, Indiana market. I believe less than 2,000 total realtors, which this next stat is going to blow your mind. $260 million in volume personally sold. And here's one of the coolest stats. Brad is a college basketball player turned real estate agent. But when he was in college, this was announced at their 20th anniversary party. He had 1,015 career points in college, and at that anniversary party, you had sold 1,015 homes. That is just a wild stat, Brad. Welcome to the show.
Remington, thanks for having me.
You're a cool dude, man. I enjoy talking to you. I'm not the only person that thinks that. The mayor apparently declared Brad Knoll Day on October 7th in the Fort Wayne market. Is that true?
That is true. Former Mayor Tom Emery did a little proclamation on that day. So pretty cool to do that. I guess that means we're doing something good for the city.
That's great, man. I don't hang a lot of things in my office, but if I got the mayor to do that, I would definitely hang that in my office. Let's talk about teams. So you grew up playing sports. You were a college basketball player. You also coach, and you have gone in and out of coaching your own kids, if I remember right. You have coached them at times, and now you're just dad, which I would like to talk about. Here's where I'd want to start. If we talk about teams within real estate, which you have, you personally believe you should not start a team until you define what?
Well, the only reason to have a team is because you have an abundance of leads. Like you have more people coming in that want to work with you than what you have the capacity to manage. And so I think that's really the fundamental philosophy around that. And Remington, we can get into so many details about teams and my background, but at the end of the day, I think right now our real estate culture is pushing teams and people use it as maybe a competitive advantage, but not everybody has the background, whether it's through sports or something that, can create a framework for a healthy team culture.
So what did you, what did growing up in the sports world teach you about business? Because you were always an athlete, but then you turned into a coach, and that's not everyone's path. Some of the best athletes and some of the best players don't actually make good coaches, but you turned into a career of coaching and even coaching your kids. What did sports teach you about leadership in business?
Yeah, it's a great question. And shameless plug, I have a podcast called Student of the Game. And I believe that there's lessons and clues if you pay attention in life. You don't have to be an athlete to understand teams, right? The whole premise of what I try to teach is it's all about clues. What has your past taught you? How can you use some of the clues of the people around you? For me, I grew up in the locker room. I tell people I have a master's degree from the locker room. And my dad was a college basketball coach. So I grew up going to games with him, recruiting. Recruiting is a big deal when it comes to, building the right team. Showing up early to practice, last to leave, all of those fundamentals about, what a sports coach goes through is so transitional into real estate. So that's kind of, my background a little bit. We moved around a lot. So real estate was kind of natural. My grandfather celebrated 55 years in the real estate business before he retired. Not in the same community. Not in the same community. No, a little town called Bern, Indiana, a little Swiss community. But we moved around a lot as my dad followed his passion into coaching. And so I just had a front row seat to what a high level coaching, looks like. And so if I'm looking at clues of my past, that's one of them that helps me build a successful real estate team and company today.
Did your dad coach in high school or college?
Just college.
So that can be a pretty mean career. Was he pretty lucky or fortunate, or was there a lot of moving around because of that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, we always had a phrase: coaches either get fired or they retire. There's not a lot of upward mobility unless you're successful. Like, you have to be successful in order to, get promoted, go to that next level. When he sat us down as a family, living in Bern, Indiana, I was 9 years old maybe, and he coached my third grade basketball team. We went 10-0, and I think he just got the bug. He was a really good player back in his prime. Scored a bunch of points, had a bunch of records, was a phenomenal college player, was a grad assistant. So basketball and coaching was in his blood. It's not something he just picked up. Mm-hmm. But he was in real estate with my grandfather. And when he coached my third grade basketball team, we won undefeated. I think he thought he was a pretty good coach. So he ended up calling his college coach up at Grace College. Went as an assistant for 2 years. They won a national championship with him on the roster. I won't go into details about his journey, but ended up getting a head coaching job up in Spring Arbor, Michigan. So family moved up to Spring Arbor, and then I committed to playing basketball for him. I had a good high school career. I committed to college playing basketball for him. And right at that time, my senior year, he got the job offer at IPFW here in Fort Wayne. And at the time, it was Division II. He took the job, ended up going Division I while we were there. So together, he coached me in college. And again, like I say, I had a front row seat just being in the locker room for, my formative years.
Wow, that's interesting. And what's cool is, like, we started the show by saying you can learn a lot about life, leadership, and business when it comes to sports. But one thing that I don't think really translates is your talent in basketball, right? So if you're talented at basketball, which it sounds like you were, you had to be in order to score that many points. Being talented probably didn't translate to sales. It doesn't translate to leadership or building a team or recruiting. What you said about your dad teaching you to show up early and stay late, some of those principles accelerated what I'm guessing got you interested to be an entrepreneur. So how did that transition happen?
Well, that's actually phenomenal. You picked that up because, there was some success that I had in high school. I scored 51 points in a game, which is still a record today at my high school. Was first team All-State multiple years. When I graduated, I was the number 3 all-time 3-point leader in the state of Michigan. So there's a lot of things that, I had some success, but that success doesn't come without the work. And so my team and my family and I have this phrase right now that we kind of stole from UCLA women's basketball, because we follow a lot of women's basketball right now with my kids. And Coach Corey Close says, it begins before it begins. If you want to win a national championship, it begins before it begins. If you want to break records, it begins before it begins. And so what you're asking me, I can answer with that simple phrase. It begins before it begins. And, to the listeners right now, if you want to be successful, there's nothing in my life that I have because I wanted it. It's because I've worked for it. And I wish I was really smart and could give you this formula of how to get there. But it all comes back down to, can you master the fundamentals of something? And I think, not to jump the gun on the conversation here, but I think that's why a lot of teams don't work, is because, they want to be successful and they skip the development process. And we can go many different ways with our conversation here, but I think what's happening right now, whether it's in society, whether it's in kids sports, youth sports, entrepreneurism, that mentorship, that development process is being removed because everybody wants instant gratification. They want success today.
Well, I've seen it time and time again in the industry where the most talented people oftentimes don't rise the ranks because they rest on their laurels. They don't apply themselves. It's more exciting to be good at something and then just take time off. And then at the end of the year, they're like, well, I didn't really, you can't be disappointed if you didn't try that hard. Right. And it's a kind of a wuss approach at doing that. So for your team, what have you seen as you're growing? Cause you recruit, right? You're a recruiter, you're a team leader. What's been some of the biggest challenges for the people that don't realize their potential on your team?
I think first and foremost, everybody has untapped potential. Everybody. And I think where a lot of team leaders get it wrong, and if I'm speaking to you right now, I've been there. So I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm not telling you how to be, the best or hit your goals. But I think the thing you have to focus on is everybody has untapped potential. But I think where we as leaders mess up is we think everybody's potential and everybody's quantum leap is going to show up in production. And sometimes you have to understand that it needs to show up in their health first. It needs to show up in their relationships first. It needs to show up in their faith. So there's so many aspects of life that if we're just looking at this one dimensional, then I think we're getting it wrong. And so that's when somebody comes to me, man, you said something about recruiting. I love that word because I think we need to constantly be recruiting. But one of the things that I tell my team and I tell people in my industry, so if there's somebody in Fort Wayne who's listening, we don't actively recruit. If I have to convince you to come here, I'm probably going to have to convince you to stay at some point. And so I want to make sure that I can be that person that we focus on your development. And it may not be your production right out of the gate. I've got a lot of people on my team that, have joined us, whether it's from a new brokerage or they're brand new. And what happens is we have to get them to understand you need to be a household name. You need to build relationships. You need to connect with a bunch of people. That's how we're going to build your business. And we're going to do it, fundamentally. And I think that's where that sports and business connection come back.
Are you finding that you're recruiting from your natural pool of where you're just spending time? Because you were a coach. You said you don't coach anymore because you just wanted to be dad. What was that decision like?
Well, if I had to choose a title, coach or dad, I'm going dad every single day.
That's a good way to put it.
And so I think, by nature, because I've been around it, Remington, my entire life, by nature, I am a coach. And there's some times I overcoach. Knowing I was on your pod this morning, I asked my daughter on the way to school, I said, hey, I'm on this podcast, we're going to talk about youth sports and coaching your kids. I said, what have I done well and what have I done wrong? And
great. I mean, so just pausing you there, most people won't ask that question. I literally just said this on stage last week. The one thing that could radically change your business or even life is if you email your closest friends and ask them how you would get better. Nobody does this. And even the ones that do, the very small percentage of people that do, it's very hard for them and me to not get defensive and make excuses and not actually take to heart what they're saying. And so you doing that is setting you apart from most people. What did she say?
She said the thing I do well is I ask great questions. So I just ask her great questions. And so, I don't think you can really get to know somebody without, really asking great questions. One of the phrases on our team that we constantly say is stay curious. Grow constantly is one of our core values. And in order to grow, you have to be curious. Remington, you cannot grow if you don't understand where you are today. Indianapolis and Fort Wayne is not too far from each other. So I do this fun thing on my team is I'm saying, how long does it take to get to Indy? And they'll all answer the same thing. No, 2 hours, about 2 hours.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you didn't ask the first question. Where am I starting from?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you have to know where you're starting at in order to know how long it takes to get somewhere. So what did she say? She said, I asked good questions. What did I do wrong? My timing might not be great. There may be a time where I have to understand this is my child. This is a teenage girl who right after practice may not want to hear, right after a game may not want to hear. And so, I've learned over time and I'm getting better at that, hey, let's go get some ice cream. Hey, I loved watching you play today. Those are some things that I've mastered so that they are the ones that are curious. Hey, Dad, what'd you think? How'd I do? And I think it's the same thing with leadership too, right? I mean, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. We've all heard that. And so when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I don't have to be on all the time, but if I can create a culture in my family or on my team where they're curious, they want feedback, they seek feedback. I mean, this podcast, is a business podcast, but a lot of realtors listen to this. Tell me right now how you sell a listing. The main thing you have to do to sell a listing is you have to get feedback. Like you have to get feedback in order to know how to position your home in the marketplace to help your sellers win. And it takes feedback to do that. So what makes you think that you personally shouldn't get any feedback if you're trying to win?
So we're talking about having a conversation with your kid. And I'm just curious, being the son of a coach and then the father as a coach, would you say that you learned a lot from your dad that, for instance, the things you didn't like, are you finding that in yourself too, or were you pretty intentional to not do it that way? How did you apply what you kind of learned from your dad and your own coaching style?
Yeah. We don't know what we don't know. And I think everybody listening here who's a leader, because that's what this podcast is for, is leaders, is you've learned something from the past, right? But I haven't really learned from my future yet. And so a lot of people ask me, they're like, hey, would you do a podcast about, raising successful kids? I'm like, well, that's not for me. That's for my kids to talk about. I don't know if they're going to be successful. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. But no, I learned a lot from my dad, and I think more is caught than taught. That's something my wife and I, keep saying to ourselves. And more is caught than taught. And so we're going to just walk alongside our kids. We're going to get super excited about their goals, and we're going to live our life as big as we can as it relates to our kids chasing their dreams and their goals. And they're going to learn a lot of lessons along the way. Did my dad and I learn a lot? We absolutely did. I learned a lot from him watching him coach. So many things he built some very successful teams because there was a lot of people who thought they were better than they were would go off and want to play at these big schools and then realize I'm not getting any playing time, and they would come back to him, and he would stay in relationships with them. He would stay in connections with them. And so by building these connections and having these relationships, he ended up maybe not getting what he wanted at the beginning, but it would come back to him being able to build a very successful program where he was at. And so there's things like that I picked up on. When I played my freshman year, I started my very first game in college. We had guys quit because the coach's son was playing more. So we went through that together. I think there's a lot of lessons we learned together, and I try to carry that over.
Where that starts, Brad, is the first sport that you put them in. I put my firstborn in soccer at like 3 or 4, and then I'm coaching. And it's not just at that point, they don't even have games. Like it's like he just practices and drills and stuff. And it wasn't even the parents. It was myself, my own inner battles. Just like, am I giving her more attention than the other kids? Is there enough parents to go around here? Because my whole goal of doing this is to spend more time with my kid and to teach these others. But it's this age. It's not like they're going to be superstars. We're just trying to get them. But and then just like the battle. So like your decision because you were coaching your kids at one point, and then your decision to sit out. What were some of the tougher things that you had to deal with as a coach? Because one of the questions I want to ask you is about bad coaches, not yourself, but like if your kid is playing for a bad coach. So like, what were some of your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, early on, so I've got 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. And so my oldest daughter, when she started playing basketball, the problem with me was the curse of knowledge. Like I just knew too much. And what that did is it caused really, I guess, unrealistic expectations for her. Right.
Okay.
I mean, she's in the 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. And here I am coaching her team. We did upwards basketball at our church. And all of a sudden, I'm the guy that's running plays, and it just didn't work. It just didn't work. And I actually got this advice from one of our assistant golf pros, when the kids were doing golf in the summer times, like at camp. And I just said, hey, I'm curious, what's your coaching style? You've got all these kids here. It's legitimately a daycare, right? What's your coaching style? And he says, Brad, there's one goal: to have fun. Yeah. If these kids don't have fun, they're not going to come back. Like if you look at it from the lens of a 3rd grader, they don't care about the fundamentals. They don't care about, they care about the color of the jerseys and are they having fun, and are they staying active? And so I think early on, I messed up with my first daughter when she was in basketball and I was coaching her. Now she's a golfer.
But it's not just you though.
It's not,
but it's not just you. It's also the other parents. Cause so then flash forward, I had 2 of my kids in basketball, 2 girls on the same team, and they're what let's call it 6 at this point. And there's some kids that are very good at basketball now that can hit the shots and hog the ball, and parents are and the parents are not all created equal, because half the parents actually subscribe to what you're saying. At this age, they just need to have fun. But then you got the guy in there that's spending $100 a week for lessons for a 6-year-old who's not subscribing to that. It starts early. The disparity between how serious a parent's going to take this, and in many cases, I think most would believe that that's a little too aggressive at that age, but some don't. Some are like, hey, it's time. Like, you got to prepare these kids now. I imagine as the coach of those ages, as they started getting older, you started seeing more and more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, you take it back even further. I think the real issue, Remington, is in my faith tradition. One of the things that I think of and I study is an apprenticeship. In my faith tradition, Jesus was a carpenter and had to work his way up. And in the end of the day, if you're a doctor, you've got to go through your apprenticeship, right? There's residency. If you're a lawyer, you've got to wait to be partner. And in our culture right now, and especially with our kids, and we can talk real estate, you get into real estate, you don't have to do anything. You can go sell houses tomorrow, and the goal is to sell as many as you can without a path to development. And the thing that's missing right now, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's real estate, we can talk about real producers and people growing their real estate teams, but especially with youth sports, is the lack of development. One of the things, if you're struggling right now, if I'm speaking directly to you, if you're struggling because you're spending so much money in your kids' travel sports, stop it. Take that money and go hire a coach and go develop your child. People need to be developed. They need to be coached. They need to master the fundamentals. And we're just playing too many games with too much pressure, with too much money, and it's causing division. And I'm not standing for that. I mean, yes, my kids are into travel sports, but with a high emphasis of you're going to be coached one-on-one. You're going to learn the fundamentals. You're going to get better. And then you're going to wait your turn. Waiting your turn actually has so many benefits that people, they're stripping their kids of that opportunity of growth when they're removing adversity from them. And I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that, but.
Well, I think it translates to someone brand new in real estate. Would you say that every single person who gets their license should be on a team or be an apprentice to another realtor?
I don't think everybody has to, but I think the majority of people need to have some type of path. They need to be in a program. I've done programs before. There's so many good teachers and trainers and mentors out there, but I think few realtors, really take the time to do that. There's a lot of companies out there that are, listen to the podcast, and I know a bunch of them have a bunch of different programs, as they onboard new agents. They're great. But at the end of the day, this business takes a while, and so, 100 Days to Greatness is a program that I did. That's awesome. And that was for 100 days, and so now what do? Most residencies last 2-3 years, 4 years,
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think developing our skills is something that it takes time, and I'm not sure everybody has the patience for that.
I wrote down a quote from our pre-show. You said, if you don't define the why, you shouldn't start a team until you know why. Otherwise, you're just going to hire a bunch of really super expensive assistants. I think that's great. But the value is different for both people. So the value of a team from you is a different perspective of the value of the team of that person. Because I think a lot of times people go through this thing where they're like, at some point they can't bring enough value to their rock stars to stay on the team before they just go off on their own. And that's an interesting conversation, because in some cases they probably should go off on their own. But I actually agree with you. I think if you're starting in this day and age, take a cut on the money and buy some time from someone who's done it better and more efficiently than you and for longer, and then have that conversation with them. And because I think that's a hard thing. I think some people stay on teams because they don't know how to have hard conversations, and they shouldn't, or they don't make decisions because they don't want to hurt feelings. But if you go into a team saying, hey, listen, I want to be on your team for a time, but there might be a time where I want to go off on my own. I think if you guys have that honest conversation, that's a good thing for all people all the way around. But I think a lot of team leaders are scared to have that conversation because they feel like they're going to lose all their people. I don't know. What's your take on that?
How much time do you have? Yeah. The reason for that quote when I told you was twofold. One, I just believe that you start a team because you have an abundance of leads, right? And so what happens is if you start a team too quick and you haven't built up your database and you haven't built up your relationships or whatever sales funnel lead generation tactics you use, doesn't matter. You start a team prematurely and you don't have an abundance of leads, okay, to hand off to them. So
let me ask you something before you, because I know you're really well versed in this, and I'm not going to throw you off too much, but I'm very curious what you believe that other people think the reason for starting a team is. Because you've said this 2 or 3 times now. The reason for starting a team is you have an abundance of leads. and the reason you came up with that phrase, I'm guessing, is there's a lot of people that don't think that, or they don't show that with why they start a team. What are most people doing when they start a team? What are they thinking?
I can only go back to my experience. When I started a team, it was a little progressive. Like there wasn't a lot of teams out there. And the few people that did start teams, they did it for two reasons. One, they tried to get a competitive advantage. And so two people would show up at the listing appointment. Two people would go show homes. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound really efficient. Like why are two people earning the same paycheck? Like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The other reason people started teams is because they tried to trick the brokers and they wanted a lower office split. And so they're like, if we team up and we get a bunch of people and I'll recruit, can we negotiate our split? So I think that's really where a lot of people started, at least in my experience. I'll tell you why I started. And the reason I can speak on this, and the reason I feel like I'm an authority figure on this is because I can tell you where I messed up. And, if you haven't messed up, I don't think you can really, preach to anybody just yet.
Yeah, you can't be on this podcast unless you've messed up.
Good. And so what failure taught me was, I started the team for the wrong reason. I knew I needed a team. I knew I wanted a team. I had an abundance of leads, but not an overabundance, right? I started the team because I wanted my net and my gross to be the same. I wanted to start a team because I wanted to cover some of my cost. And that was for the wrong reason. And so, I've had team members come and go. Now we've got probably the best team we've ever had. We've had the best people, we've got the best systems and the best structures. And it's because we've messed up and, we've skinned our chin, a couple of times doing it the wrong way. And so over time, I started to realize, like, if I'm building a team, this is a business. Well, how do I build a sustainable business? Well, I've got to have an abundance of leads. Number one, I need to have staff. I need to hire somebody. I need a transaction coordinator. I need somebody who can handle marketing. What ended up happening, Remington, is I started to believe, like, okay, what is the realtor's job description? Like, what is the realtor's job description? And so we settled on four things. On my team, if you're on my team, you have four main job descriptions: build relationships, list homes, show homes, and negotiate deals. And if you're doing one of those things, if you're doing something other than those, then you're an assistant. Like there's things that you can hire off at a lower, cost per hour that somebody can do a better job. One of the things I hear a lot of people say, whether it's team leaders or people that have teams that aren't real confident in the model themselves, is they're like, oh, I have so-and-so and I'm going to hand off and they're just so much better at this than me. And they're world-class at this. And they're using all of these, sayings that we've heard before. And it's because they really haven't built the foundation. And it's like, how does that handoff work? I mean, I've done that, right? I've messed up. I've handed off a client and then I've never talked to that client again because I'm like, well, then this person's working with them. And now is it awkward that two people are talking to? And so there's this dance that you just have to do. And that's why development is so key. Development is all about messing up and, feeling like you're behind. And, there's a reason there's a JV and then a varsity. Like there's a reason there's freshmen. And the best thing about freshmen is they become sophomores, and then there's a reason there's a sophomore slump because you think you know it all. There's a progression to all of this. And so as the listeners here are trying to build their teams, and I could just offer, any piece of advice is you're running a business. And the goal of the business is for sustainability. And I think the thing we haven't talked about yet, not to keep going here, is not to sound foo-foo, but let's talk about happiness. Let's talk about peace of mind. Like you asked me the question why I built the team. I was on a panel for real producers, and I got the question. They said, well, what's your structure? And I just and this is kind of the antithesis of your question. What's my structure? My structure has to do with how I want to live my life. So if we're not living the same life, my structure may not mean anything to you. I want to pick up my kids from practice. I want to coach them if I want to. I want to be available on the nights and weekends for my family. I want to make sure that my priority is in check, and I'm going to build a team around what supports the lifestyle that I want to live. And nobody has to live my same lifestyle, but that's how I built my team, is to support my lifestyle. And I think that's something that you have to have a ton of confidence. Number one, that it's going to work. You have to have a ton of faith that it's going to work. And then, this may not sit well with everybody. You have to live on less than what you earn.
Mm-hmm. Below your means. It's an easy conversation to have. Most people don't want to hear that. You said something earlier about JV and varsity. It's so true. My own experience, everyone wants to make varsity. I wish there was a way you could really get through to the ego of a teenager and explain how that's not the question they should be asking. Like, can I make varsity? Am I good enough to make varsity? The question you should be asking is, where can you get the most development for your own skill set for the near and the near future and the future. And there was a kid that freshman year, like we were at a small school, so a lot of freshmen, not a lot, but you could make varsity as a freshman. And there was one kid that made varsity as a freshman. He was a little bit more developed as just a kid, and the varsity coach said, I want him on the team. Well, what happened was the rest of us who were about the same talent level, but just not developed physically, were on JV. And by junior year, that kid didn't see any playing time because he didn't get any development, and the rest of us were starting. And by senior year, he quit, and we went on to, go sectional runner up. And that's a very sad, cautionary tale of why are you trying to make varsity? But to try to tell a teenager, to get them to see, put your ego on hold. You're not going to be wearing the Letterman jacket for an entire year. But guess what? It's not about the year. It's about the life. That's a hard conversation to have with a teenager.
I think it goes beyond that. If I can add to that a little bit. So you may have listeners right now. They want to be they want to be a real producer, right? In our market, you got to be a top 300 agent. I don't know what it is in everybody else's market, but in Fort Wayne, you got to be in the top 300 to be a real producer. You may have people listening who want to do that. You may have people listening who want to be on a panel. You may have people who want to be on the cover, right? Like there's all these things that you've created now, Remington, and congratulations. I think it's a phenomenal business model that you have. And it's great for the real estate industry. It's great for the communities. It's so good and refreshing. So not to blow any smoke, but I just keep up the good work, because the work you guys are doing really matters, and it's great for the real estate industry. But where I'm going with that is I was very fortunate to have a father who understood sports. I played varsity as a freshman in high school. My sister played varsity as a freshman in high school. My daughter is on the number 3 team in the state of Indiana and is playing varsity as a freshman. And so our family sets big goals, right? But I want to make sure that there's a cautionary tale that I want to make sure your listeners have, whether it's about real estate or business, or if you're an entrepreneur and you just want success faster than anything else. That's actually something that, I started to develop inside of me. It's innate. I want to achieve success faster than what my peers were. And there's a lot of good, healthy habits to that. There's also some very unhealthy habits to that we can unpack of ways that I've kind of worked through that. But one of the things I remember my dad saying is, as I was trying out my freshman year, he went into my high school coach and he says, listen, and they knew each other, right? So like, imagine you're a high school coach and you're coaching a college coach's son. Like there's probably a little bit of pressure there, unspoken. My dad goes in, and I remember this conversation very vividly. We went in together, and my dad looked at the coach and he goes, if you want Brad on the varsity, just because you want to say you have a freshman playing varsity and that helps your program, our family does not support that. I want the ball in Brad's hands. So if he's going to be playing, then put him on the varsity. But if he's going to be sitting, put him on the JV. And that, like, I'll never forget that, because what my dad was saying, that I was too naive at the time to even understand. What he was saying is, Brad, you have to develop. And you cannot develop if you don't have reps. You got to get the reps in. And so all of us listening here, we want success. We want growth. We want to achieve at a very high level. Like you have high achievers on listening to this podcast. But I think the curse is wanting to achieve faster than where you're developing. And if you want to achieve faster than where you're developing, you cannot sustain it. So my encouragement is, make sure the focus is always on development. Your achievements will follow. Like, you got to love it. You got to love putting in the work. And I think, that's where Kobe's famous for talking about the process and just loving the work. And the championships will follow. The accolades will follow. Everything will follow. But you got to love the work.
It's phenomenal. We got a minute here, and I'm just curious, because I really wanted to get this question, but I got out of order. What do you do with bad coaches? If your kid is on a team that's either a club or a school, a coach that you don't agree with, everyone knows they're terrible. How do you parent and coach your own kid on how to respond to a coaching style or just decisions that you don't agree with?
Short answer, it begins before it begins. I don't think you're equipped to have a conversation with a coach if your kid's not playing, if you haven't built a relationship with the coach. If you haven't taken the time to watch practice and see that your kid's goofing off, if you haven't taken the time to get to know the coach and what his philosophy and what his style is, then it's too late. You can't, it begins before it begins. And what that means is we're all going to have bad coaches. We're all going to have bad bosses. If you have a boss right now and you don't like him, what are you going to do? Quit your job? Like that's part of the development process. One of the things that I've communicated to my kids' coaches now is I've said, you're the coach. Tell me what you expect so that we can echo that at home. And I'll tell you this, Remington, I don't believe any player should quit on a coach or quit on a team unless that coach violates a core value that you and your family hold. And if there's a core value that's been violated, great, move on. If there's a coach that does not help with your child's development, move on. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, they quit on their coaches and they quit on their teams because they seek exposure, they seek playing time, and they seek things that do not subscribe to the development philosophy.
And it's a slow play too. Like you talk about, what are you going to do? Quit your job? Well, I mean, this is a time in history where it's easier than ever to actually start a new career. Like back even 20 years ago, you couldn't start a new career. Like if you go 50, 60 years ago, like you were in one industry and probably one job for the majority of your life. It's just a different day and age. And I think that translates now to the challenges that coaches are having because parents have no delayed gratification. They want it now. And so if you're not getting the results you want for your kid, sure, I'll switch schools, I'll switch clubs, I'll pay for that. It's a different challenge than we've ever faced here in history. But I love your answers, Brad. This has been phenomenal. I want to finish this podcast by talking about the event we have coming up, because I think that this content especially speaks to what we're going to be doing at RP Elevate. So in September at RP Elevate, we're going to have 4 keynote speakers that are really well known on national stages, authors, Rory Vaden, Molly Bloom, Steve Sims, Tom Ferry is speaking at this event. But one thing that I think is kind of understated that I think a lot of people need to know is that realtors like Brad who sit on these master classes are going to be on panels and going to be speaking at this event. And this kind of content is so powerful and could be the thing that's keeping you from having your best year ever. And if you apply these things, you would have incredible growth. So rplevate.com if you can make it. Brad, I've got so many takeaways from this. I'm going to do a second episode just talking about what I learned. Thanks for being on, and congrats on all your success.
Absolutely. If I can give one more thought here is I think a lot of people, you talk about Elevate. I love that word. It's actually my word of the year. And what I've found about Elevate is not about growth. It's about mastery, and mastery is built on plateaus. Mastery is built with doing the work. And so don't think that you're going to elevate to grow, because that's not sustainable, but mastery is, and mastery is built on the plateaus.
Fantastic. Thanks again for being on. If you want to impact who is on the show or what we talk about, email us at podcast@realproducersmag.com. We'll see you next time.